Prince Harry has been told to apologise for what during his unofficial royal tour of Colombia. Now, be careful.
I haven't the faintest idea, as I carefully avoided looking at anything to do with it.
Having read Prince Harry's book, Spur, what do you think interests him about Colombia?
I couldn't possibly comment, Andre. Couldn't possibly comment. I've got the lawyers in my ear, I think. But, this is so desperate, isn't it? I mean, if you want to do royal duties, just come back to the UK and say sorry. I think people would forgive them, genuinely. I actually don't think everyone would
But he
forgive
wants
them,
to do everything on his own terms.
He does.
This is the key thing.
Yes.
He hates rules. I mean, he's a very typical second son.
Yeah.
He hates rules.
Yeah.
He's also decided that he's got a cause. And if you put together a cause and liking breaking rules, and you've got a wife like that, right, it is a deadly, deadly mix.
But he can't actually achieve anything, can he? He's going around what is
he
relatively...
can.
It's a poor country. And the poor people there, according to the newspapers, are like, who is this guy? What's he here for? What's he doing?
Hang on
He's
a
not
second.
giving us any money.
That would
What is
apply to many
hilarious-
rich countries as well.
No,
by the way.
well, the point of this tour was to go and talk about social media and the harms of online.
Yes.
And so many of those kids can't even get on the internet, which is absolutely hilarious.
I just wonder, David, whether he'd raise an army and come back if he could and depose his brother. Come on, look, I know about...
He'd have to depose his father first.
Yes.
Which
But look, because you're a historian, it must have crossed your mind.
it's much more important to understand that Harry has done something very peculiar. He's identified with his mother in a very, very in a kind of quasi-revolutionary sense. He now sees himself, again, let's be truthful, Diana saw it as her task to destabilise the monarchy. She embarked on a programme of revenge. He's carrying out that revenge. Again, he sees himself as the heir of Diana, with the attack on the media, with the attack on the press, with going into alliance with all those funny actors that we've more or less forgotten their names. I forget everybody's name, but I particularly...
This whole, when you look at his relationship with Meghan, it's sort of Freudian, isn't it? Because it feels like
he's married his mother.
He's married his mother. But a woman that's pretending to be his mother.
I believe the big word is Oedipal.
That's
if we can spell it.
There we go. Don't ask me to.
But based on my limited relationship experience, I can guarantee.
We don't want too many details, please.
I can guarantee that relationship is going to end in tears.
Yes.
But everybody says.
Crashing down.
Everybody says this, and it continues. Now, everybody was saying it will only last a year, it'll only last 2 years. I think they've become a kind of quasi-parody, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. They feed off each other, they feed each other's vanities. Somehow they get, how they do it, beg, borrow the money, which is all she wants.
Beg.
For lots, well, borrow.
But,
I think they certainly are begging, that's for sure.
But I just don't understand how it all works between them two. I have to say, though, you do think about Harry would be
Am I allowed to use a rude word beginning P and whipping?
Let me just say this one thing. It would be quite
I learned
hard.
that from my young friends.
It would be quite hard for him to go back and go, well, to be fair, she was a wrong. And oh, hello, it's Meghan.
Hey.
She's saying that Harry, he absolutely loves me. I told him that, and he has complied. Well done, Meghan. Anyway, so David, you are such a knowledgeable man that you got the question right, even though you didn't know the answer.
There you go.
So we asked you what Harry was asked to apologise for. You said slavery, among other things. The answer was slavery. OK, on to Alexander. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has launched a clampdown on the rise of extremism by treating misogyny as what?
I know the answer to this, but I think we should unpick it a little bit
Go on.
first. Because I think Labour are the cause of so much misogyny. These left-wingers are constantly attacking young men. They're constantly attacking anything to do with masculinity. And they just want young boys and men in general to conform to this weird sort of quasi-trans activist level of feminism, which nobody thinks is possible, biologically possible.
Was it Jordan Peterson who said, if you think that strong men are dangerous, try dealing with weak men?
Weak men, yes. Weak men create hard times, right? But the answer to this question, if I may give it, is extremism, right? So they want to...
No, it was terrorism.
Sorry, terrorism. Thank you.
Terrorism.
That's what I was getting to. Terrorism. The answer to the question was terrorism, which is absolutely baffling. So
if I'm a bit of a sexist, I could be put under terrorism rules. Like what 28-day detention?
Well, look, okay, so I put out a relatively a poor in taste tweet about Angela Rayner, and I was criticising her dress wear, and I said she pretends to be a working class hero, but she spends thousands of pounds on these clothes. I did apologise, let's just say, because I know people, people could take it the wrong way. That wasn't my intention, but I tell you what, I'd be in jail as a terrorist today.
I had a mate who set up a Twitter account called I Spy MP. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, I remember
and
that. I've been on that a few times.
He used to write the most horrendously sexist stuff about these particularly bolshy female Labour MPs, and they used to go absolutely crazy about it.
But the problem they're going to have is definitions, isn't it? Because it's all about misogyny, how you treat women, quite understandable in that respect. But then they can't define a woman.
No.
They don't know how to define a woman. How can you come up with rules if you can't define a woman?
It was like after that Sarah Everard thing where the Green Party said what we should do is stop all men from walking the streets until we find the person responsible. Well, that's fine, except for the fact a bloke can define himself as a woman.
Exactly.
And then would just be perfectly welcome to walk around. Now, David, they've asked me in the gallery to ask you the most ridiculous question ever about the history of misogyny, right? What sort of a question is that? But I'll ask him anyway. David, can you tell us the history of misogyny?
Yes. More or less every culture was, by our standards, misogynistic until about yesterday. It was assumed broadly that women have fewer rights than men. In England, until well into the 19th century, no married woman could own property.
Yes.
You could only own your own property when you actually, your husband died, which is why you get merry widows. So, I mean, all of the vote for women comes only, we forget this, votes for women only come at the end of the First World War.
Yes.
But what is remarkable in a country like England is that Britain, we were able to do it without having to tear everything else down. All the broadening of the franchise in England has been able to accommodate itself within existing structures. But we're all leaving this enormous elephant out of the room. Which is by far, by modern standards, the most misogynic culture of all these subcultures in Britain at the moment? It is, of course, Islam.
Yes, correct.
I mean, here is the main alliance group of Labour, the ones that they are heavily patronising in the current block of riots, the group that is overwhelmingly, structurally, in exactly the same way we all used to be for hundreds and hundreds of years. There is the formal rule that women walk behind their men.
I mean, I have to say, Alex, I've personally gone knocking on doors and discovered this whole family voting thing where dad decides how everybody votes.
Yes.
And women do not routinely get the vote in many ethnic minority areas of Britain.
You're absolutely right. We saw before the election, and in that spectacular video of Angela Rayner sat there when it looked like some form of community leaders' centre, possibly a mosque, where it was just a room full of what looked like Muslim men. It looked like Muslim. I'm not saying they all were, but it looked like that. She's appealing to the vote of possibly multiple households there. That is not British, and this is what riles British people up. This is not how we do democracy.
But it goes much further than that. Remember, so many of these groups are in fact tribal.
Yes.
Did you notice, if we go back to Rotherham and all the rest of it, those extraordinary cases where every one of those child abusers was each other's cousin? These are groups in which you constantly marry within a small group of families, so everybody's related to each other.
You made a brilliant point, and apologies for it being repetitious, but you said that, look, one of the things that happens is people tend to marry their cousin, not because they're particularly obsessed with it, but because they're moving people from Pakistan and Bangladesh to the United Kingdom. And so every generation
becomes re-foreign.
Yeah,
in other
re-foreign.
words, becomes re-foreign in, by the way, exactly the same way that our royal families do.
Yes.
They remain German because they married back to Germany every generation until 1917. But this is worse, actually. They marry their cousins on principle.
Simon, you're a former Labour MP. I've said to you loads of times that the working class need to take back control of the Labour Party. I think it's been incredibly damaging for Britain, the way the Labour Party has been destroyed. But in parts of Britain, they appear to be effectively an Islamic party now. And I just don't understand it.
Oh, absolutely. And what we've got with this Home Secretary, and she's saying we're going to tackle misogyny. She's not going to tackle misogyny within the Asian Muslim community.
You see, this is the question.
That's not what we're going to see.
So it'll be all incel. It'll be the whole
everywhere.
nonsense of
She'll
incel.
tackle it everywhere except in that voting bloc that she and her colleagues are keen to
But
protect.
are we now we see this two-tier policing, which, by the way, I do not accept as a conspiracy theory. Other people might disagree with me. But we're now saying, well, we have different policing in this area. We enforce different rules in this area. I mean, I've said this before today. My nieces are incredibly privileged to go to Bolton School, but on the bus, on the way to their private school, they drive past girls' houses who are the same age as them, who are forced into child marriage, despite being British citizens. So the two sets of rules now.
And what we see now, if you look at all those that have been imprisoned for putting comments on Facebook, are poor, white, working class people. They are the traditional Labour voter, and they've been excluded by a party that's more focused on the North London elite. That's the reality.
I mean, I've said this about you before. I've known you for a while. Your political views have changed not at all during that period. But now, and OK, people have responded saying that you had a scandal, and I accept that. But you would not be welcome in the Labour Party with your views now.
No, absolutely right. They are a party that just doesn't associate with working class people. That's the reality of it. Yeah, absolutely. They're ashamed of them.
And I think it's important to note that where they don't pander to the Muslim community or the ethnic minority community in that area, they hemorrhage votes. Jess Phillips almost lost a seat. Jonathan Ashworth famously lost a massive majority.
Blackburn.
Yeah, Keir Starmer.
I mean, those four Muslim MPs. I mean, I have to say, and maybe you will know better than me. You know, we haven't voted on religious lines in this country for hundreds of years.
No, we
and
did.
Yet it's back.
Oh yes, we
okay.
did. In Glasgow and in Liverpool, there was definitely Protestant Catholic.
Right.
Northern Ireland. But the trouble is, we're going backwards.
Yes.
We're going backwards to
yeah.
a general sectarianism. And also, can I recite a little limerick? Because the Labour Party is riding a tiger. Do you remember the lovely limerick about there was a young lady of Niger who smiled as she rode on a tiger. They returned from the ride with the young lady inside and the smile on the face of the tiger. Well, that's the Labour Party with the Muslim vote. Look at what's happening. Look, the most interesting thing. Let's because we can be accused of saying terrible things. Let's deal with direct evidence. Let's look at Jess Phillips. Let's look at her apologising, denouncing Richard Tice, justifying the rioters at Bawdley, right? Then let's look at her count when she's booed by a large group of Muslims there.
No. Apparently they were misogynists. They were not. It had nothing
now,
to...
come on.
According to Jess Phillips.
No. I've now got a question for our really very not clever chairman. How do you tell the difference?
I've got no idea.
No. Well, there we are. Shut up and listen to somebody better.
What is wrong with this man?
He's on a roll.
I'm indeed on a roll. And then look back to how she then described what her election campaign had been. She said it was horrible. She said that people were being told that God would hate them if they did not vote for the Islamic Party. She said this is un-British, this is illegal. And what does she do at the first moment when she has to perform on this? She kisses the rod that beats her. Yeah. Now, I think the Labour Party forfeits any kind of public respect, whatever. It is embracing something which is utterly alien to itself.
Yes. And they're going to suffer for it in the long term.
Oh, and of course,
we
do have to move on, but I will say one thing. The one thing they do not do is support the moderate voices who want people treated as individuals and want to make that community wealthier, healthier and happier. Unbelievable. We're back in the wrong guys. But anyway, I think you did answer this question, but I'll give you it again. Yep. Yvette Cooper has decided to treat misogyny as what?
Terrorism.
Is absolutely correct.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. It's time for That Was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
Striking train drivers could see their salaries for 4 days a week jump 10 grand to how much?
Oh, now then, I don't know the total. It's a 15% increase, so it goes up to about 80,000, does it? Something like that.
Oh, do you know what? You're quite close. I'll tell you what I don't understand. So that stupid privatisation, which was basically not really a privatisation of the railways, is effectively gone. The biggest provider of rail services now is the government, and obviously Network Rail's in the public sector. The ticket pricing and timetables was always in the public sector. These train drivers are getting what they want. Renationalisation of the railways, big pay rises.
Yeah.
I worry that the reason they're able to go on strike is because they're paid so much they don't mind taking unpaid leave.
Yeah, there's some truth in that. But the scandal around these public sector pay rises is all about Labour's sponsorship. So the C word is often used in relation to the Tories. I mean corruption, not any other word.
Well,
The word you can repeat.
I will say one thing. I will say one thing. When I worked for the Conservatives, both of those words were used. If I've been telling you.
But corruption within Labour, if you look how much money Labour MPs and Labour cabinet ministers have had from the trade unions over the last few years, it's a phenomenal amount of money. And now they've come into office and they're doling out these pay rises to public sector workers.
And it's
scandalous.
not just the MPs and the cabinet ministers, it's the National Executive Committee, the ones that write the policy for Labour. I think it's 2/3 of them might actually, but that will need fact checking, but I think it's up to 2/3 of them that are actually union members.
Can I tell you the best piece of corruption I've ever seen? And I guarantee this is true. So obviously, as you know, you have to register all donations over £5,000 and there can be no donations from foreign countries. Correct?
Yeah.
At the Conservative black and white ball, and next time it goes on, you watch this, they have an auction at the end of things like paintings of the party leader. A painting of William Hague went for £250,000. But because it's a unique item, at a public auction, if you are a foreign national, you can buy it for £250,000 and not appear on the register.
What do you think a painting of Keir Starmer would go for?
Oh!
5 years in prison, that's what it'd go for.
Do you remember at the end of the series of Spitting Image, they used to auction off all of the puppets, but what they used to have was a maximum bid on Michael Winner of £5. So they'd go, Maggie went for 10 grand, Kinnock went for 5 grand, Michael Winner only got 5.
The only person that's going to buy Rishi Sunak's portrait is probably his father-in-law. I mean, I can't imagine anyone's going to buy that thing.
Yeah, that's right, actually. I mean, what you saw at this ball, it was extraordinary, was 10 big donors all bidding against each other, and they clearly arranged
Can we go back to the question? Can we get, in other words, to the Labour Party's corruption?
He's a better chairman at this meeting than you are, actually.
Hang on a second.
Do you want to swap?
Hang on a second.
I got much more practice at it.
To be fair, he has been round the block a few times. It's not his first rodeo, maybe.
But I mean, what we've forgotten is that what this Labour Party now is not the party of the working class. Simon, you were saying quite correctly, that's been long ago abandoned. It is the party of the public sector.
Yes.
If you go back to that bizarre speech that Starmer gave, do you remember that line, unburdened by doctrine? And it's the most doctrinaire government we've ever had. But the other thing was this marvellous incantation about public service. What it really means is the public sector. In other words, it's an awful thing to say.
They're voting themselves money.
They're voting themselves money, and we become a version of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
The Soviet Union was run again by so-called public service, all of whom were party members. Well, as we've seen now, virtually the whole civil service are Labour supporters, if not Labour members. Obviously, the same is true of the trade unions, or the same is true of most of we would seem doctors. Look at the extraordinary performance of junior doctors, led by Open Socialists, and so on. So it's much worse than corruption. It's a kind of political economic nexus with its own set of nonsensical values as well.
OK, we are going to move on. So I don't know what to do about this, Simon, because you said 80, you think it's approximately 80. I'll tell you what we're going to say. We're going to say correct because it's 81. Well done. OK, so to David, a Christian woman who was arrested for doing what outside an abortion clinic has been awarded £13,000 by the police. She was praying silently, wasn't she? Unbelievable.
Yes, because there is a determined attempt again. We've heard all of this stuff from the left, how important protest is. But it's an absolute right. But oh no, you mustn't protest outside an abortion clinic.
Yes.
You've got a kind of cordon sanitaire around it. I'm sure if the legislation designed to protect from Islamophobia comes in, there'll be exactly the same rules will be introduced round mosques, but not round churches.
Yes.
And in other words, there is everywhere you look, there is a group that's privileged, exactly as there was in the Soviet Union, and the rest of us poor saps.
And
do you know what? I know this is supposed to be a comedy, but it really is not funny.
But the problem is with this, when you make this point, people attempt to, I mean, you or one woman attempts to make this point, you are accused of extremism.
I am extremely right.
Yes. Okay.
Not far right, right so far.
Extremely right.
But Alex, I'll tell you
absolutely
I'll tell you what upsets me. Look, I've got to be honest with you. We've got a guy called Ken, and he's the bloke that you see out and about in Trafalgar Square, you know, talking about God and all that sort of thing. And he's basically a harmless guy, and he's actually quite a nice bloke and whatever. And he sometimes actually comes to this building. He's not protesting, he's just standing there. Well, I'll tell you what, he gets pretty badly bullied by people. And also, it's always the Christians that get arrested. You know, people who are preaching Islam never have any problems. I mean, I remember when I was in Manchester, that Al-Muhajiroon lot were openly supporting terrorism, and the police didn't give a toss for years.
Finsbury Park.
Yeah, they shut the streets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw the pro-Palestine protests out. There was plenty of rhetoric in there that I would deem quite aggressive, actually. You know, calling for intifada.
I never thought of you being an understatement.
It's an understatement, really, isn't it?
I've got to be honest with you. When they called for that day of jihad and all the Jewish schools closed, I'll tell you what I would have done. We should have advertised on TV and radio for volunteers to come and walk them to school. Do you know what we should? Do you know what we should say to a lot of these extremists? Come on, if you think you're hard enough.
Exactly. This is the silent majority thing again, and I've been saying this for a really long time. The silent majority need to stop being so silent because they're seeing their values and their freedom of speech constantly taken away from them.
Alex, there has been a process of deliberately shutting people up. You can't say that thing.
Of course.
But I think you're saying the silent majority. That's what's arising now, isn't it? The riots, in reality.
But
you can call them far right and everything else.
It's
the people beginning to speak. And the idea that Labour or Starmer has quashed this problem is an absolute nonsense.
It's a total farce.
Because people are extremely angry with the double standards, whether it's in relation to religion and practicing Christianity or policing and everything else.
Yeah, sorry, isn't it really you were saying people need to start speaking up. One of the glories of Britain was we didn't have rioting. That we had a political process that worked. We had a public sphere in which you could say more or less what you wished. I mean, I am mourning what has been lost. I'm mourning the honesty of old British policing. You know, we invented a proper police force as opposed to the armed thugs that you get in France.
But David, we saw there was riots, you know, when Thatcher closed the mines down. We're used to rioting. But what we didn't have was the Prime Minister going out. What he did yesterday in Northern Ireland was to say all the rioters are racist.
Sorry. Just 1 second. Really, please, facts. We can protect ourselves with facts. Britain does not have a legitimated tradition of rioting.
No, that's very true.
And unlike France, where it is absolutely part of the structure, and on very many European countries are the same, because we pioneered government by consent as well as policing by consent, we are deliberately destroying it. Yeah. And it's a terrible thing.
I do want to make one point. I have to say, having sat on the selection panel for a Conservative candidate, the Conservative candidate for Windsor, who was almost certainly going to win and did win, I worry about the way that parliamentarians are selected, because the vast majority of people in these communities have no involvement whatsoever, and quite often people are imposed. Something to think about. But anyway, Christian woman, what did she get in trouble for? Praying. Absolutely right. OK, Alex, Reform UK is now beating who in the polls? Why have we asked that question?
Well, it's not hard, is it? It's not the Liberal Democrats, because they've been far behind the Reform in the polls for months. They're now beating the Tories, of course. And they've beaten the Tories a few times. It's not just now. This has been going on for the last few months, where we saw them surging ahead popularity-wise. Obviously, it didn't translate into the vote in the general election that we'd like to have seen. But who's surprised? Reform really, really do speak to that working class group that Labour have lost, and probably lost forever, as much as the Tories had that group up until 2019. But
I want to ask Simon about this, because it seems to me that right across Northern England, the Conservatives still have a ceiling, and I'd suspect that Reform UK don't have. Reform UK definitely don't have the baggage the Conservatives have, but I don't think they've got the ceiling either.
No, I think the Conservatives are going to struggle for a considerable amount of time, whoever they pick as leader. And it looks like, I think they're going to pick somebody relatively moderate, and I think that'll be...
Too close to Kerr, the election.
Yeah, it'll be a disaster for them.
Yeah.
And so where do people go? And I think, and it's proven now, for Reform voters, a lot remained Conservative in the last general election, voted Conservative because they thought they might be wasting the vote with Reform.
Yeah.
But now that they've seen people do vote Reform and we get MPs elected, so more people than ever will be voting Reform. I have
to say, I continue to be of the view that the 5 members of Parliament that Reform got is fine, and that is a bridgehead. But I think it's the 98 second places that is the real Exocet missile on the system.
Well, this same report that put Reform second again actually showed today how that would translate into seats. We're talking about 64 seats, which I think is an understatement. If the general election was held today, I think they would win more, if you're asking me. If you look at the dissatisfaction of this government.
So the Conservatives need to pick a leader who's prepared to do a deal with Reform come the next general election.
Correct. But only one man that would do that.
Are they kind of now, is there now a kind of working class Conservative Party and middle class Conservative Party?
Well, that was actually how the Conservative Party was founded. That was exactly what Disraeli was able to do. And it's interesting listening to you too on it. Disraeli married those two things, above all by patriotism.
Yes.
He married it by an aggressive foreign policy that put Britain first. And until a Conservative Party dares, unlike Labour, to speak firmly on behalf of Britain, and I'm going to use a completely, everybody, this is a really rude word, until they learn to speak for England.
Yes.
The thing that these riots were essentially, with Northern Ireland as a different... By the way, the one place that rioting is actually part of the tradition and violence is part of the tradition is Ireland.
Yeah.
The whole way in which immigration is going to play out in Ireland is something we should, both sides of the border, is something we should really, really be looking at. But until the Conservative Party dares to speak for England, somebody has got to. Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland all are legitimated within this bizarre structure of devolution. Structure of devolution that we have. If you remember, back in the days of the old Wesleyan question, the real Wesleyan question now is, who represents England? Are you allowed to be English? Are you allowed to be? Are we an ethnic group? I mean, there was that wonderful moment. It's one of the things, I don't normally look at Twitter, but there was a wonderful moment.
You do surprise me.
Isn't it astonishing? There was a wonderful moment in which David Lammy was appearing on, I think it was LBC, and this woman said, "What are you?" And blah, 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 blah. She said, "You're Afro-Caribbean." He said, "Well, I think I'm English." She said, "You can't be."
Really?
And this, I think, this is going to be the big question.
Yes.
Are we... Every other nation is entitled to national self-determination. Are we?
Yes.
Well, especially as you get to 2050 and the immigration numbers are so high that Brits will start to become a minority in the country. Then will we start to see this reverse of what's been happening the last 10, 15 years where English people tend to not to have any, British people in general, don't have any denomination when it comes to ethnicity whatsoever. Will that happen? I don't know, but it it like at this point.
Starmer and the Labour cabinet don't want us to have any national
Absolutely.
identity. They want us to have this diverse...
Because what is the definition? Again, this attempt at pretending we're Brits. Brits or Britons, they were ancient they're ancient chaps and wear woad and go and fight Romans. Suddenly we're being told we're Brits. The only people who ever referred to us as Brits were Americans and Irish, and it wasn't a term of... It was not a term of affection. But the trouble is, British nationality is just what it is. It is a flag of convenience. It means absolutely nothing at all.
I've got to say one thing. My analogy on multiculturalism is like, in my fridge at the moment, I've got a series of things that I like. I've got a bottle of wine, I've got a curry, and I've got a chocolate cake. If I put them all in a blender together and then served it up, that would not improve any of the dishes. Something to think about. Anyway, Alex, who are Reform beating?
Labour.
No.
Tories! Sorry. In my dreams, they would be. Sorry. They will beat Labour. Let's correct
Okay.
Not far off.
Start again.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to take your first answer, which was Labour, which was...
We've got a chance here,
tell you what,
David.
come back to me in 4 years.
No, let me just say this. This is the first time somebody's got a question wrong in about 6 months. Alex
And it's my first time back as well. I can't believe it.
Alex has got a question wrong. It's extraordinary. Extraordinary.
I'm just fantasising, all right? I'm fantasising.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. It's time for That Was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
The UK is releasing prisoners from jail to make room for anti-immigration protesters and offensive tweeters. Is that true or false?
That's absolutely true.
Unbelievable.
It's an absolute scandal. They're releasing criminals early so that you can put people into prison who've made odd, strange, inappropriate remarks on social media. What has this country come to? And it's in a matter of weeks of a Labour government taking power. There's no doubt about this. It wasn't happening months ago. It's only happening now.
But it's Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, and I know you've railed against this, so maybe it's slightly repetitive, but Keir Starmer is treating this solely as a prosecution issue. Any of the concerns that people have, and I accept, burning down a hotel is not acceptable, but any concerns that people have, I think Keir Starmer sees this as an opportunity to squash opposition.
You've got to remember his background. He was Director of Public Prosecution, so he knows all about prosecuting people.
Well, he doesn't, does he? Jimmy Savile.
Jimmy Savile certainly didn't.
Well,
No, it's very convenient. But secondly, remember what he was like in the pandemic. He would have been much harsher, much stricter, more authoritarian, and now that he's got power, he's being exactly that.
Yeah, the
He's being
reality
authoritarian.
is...
But let me just make this point. He's being authoritarian against traditional white working class people. That's who are being put in
But he's
prison for this
authoritarian
stuff.
against everybody.
That's true.
His management of his party is aggressively authoritarian. And again, we're going to see it. The management, all this chatter about growth is pure pie. If chatter can be pie in the sky, what Labour is doing is imposing regulation after regulation after regulation. They decided they don't like regulation. Do you know what they're doing? They're setting up a committee to cut back on regulation.
I've to say.
It is a complete. But it's this
Ministry of
absolute. It's mad. It's funny and it's terrible.
They said, David, they turned round and said that they wanted to make planning easier, so they were hiring another 300 planning inspectors.
right, yeah.
I mean, that is just the opposite.
It is completely deranged. And I predict that between grossly inflated public sector wages and the fact that you will not only introduce all of the kind of regulations we've been talking about, we will reapproximate to European regulation as well. So
right.
all of which we will gold plate. I think the risk of very, very rapid economic collapse is on the cards.
Oh, and of course, just one thing to dovetail on, although it's not related to the question, I think the one person who will be remembered as causing more poverty in Britain than anybody else is Ed Miliband.
Absolutely.
That guy
That is certainly true.
absolutely
Certainly true.
insane in the sense that he just is determined to keep energy bills so sky high that people can't use it.
Well, that's certainly the case, and we've already seen that heat pump farce all over Europe, where people are struggling to actually heat their homes and because it's
I have to say to you, and I don't want to sound like an elitist, but the average wage in this country is something like...
That's a fine... Please, tell me I didn't hear it.
Sorry.
My ears are bleeding.
But hang on a second. For people listening on the radio, your panting is going to go...
Just get that on a loop.
Well,
I just wanted to say one thing.
The average wage in this country is 33 grand a year, right? When you are getting people to pay 500 a month in energy bills and 25% inflation in 1 year, I cannot understand how ordinary people get by.
No, they are. But we have to be real about this. The Tories have set this up for them, right? Boris Johnson's government put these net zero mad targets in, which Ed Miliband's just going to exasperate. And all these laws...
It's actually Theresa May.
Oh,
it's
you're
Theresa,
right. It was
Theresa May. Let's be accurate again.
Thank
it is
you, David.
Theresa May who legislates the target year.
Yes.
And that is, and it makes it binding at law, which is why we're now seeing law courts actually holding the government to account. It is balmy. But there's an even bigger balminess, which is is the whole idea that there can be a green economic revolution.
No,
it's deranged.
It's not going to happen.
Do you know what we should do? We should stop calling wind turbines turbines. We should start calling them windmills.
Yes.
This makes clear that we're going back behind the Industrial Revolution to an erratic, primitive form of power. And you cannot, physics are very simple, you cannot improve industrial productivity by replacing cheap, efficient power with expensive, inefficient power. It's a lunacy.
I've got to say, look, David, one of the reasons that you and I know each other is because I've got an enormous amount of respect and watched all of your stuff on YouTube. His channel, by the way, is absolutely superb. But you made a point, which I'd never really thought about with these green energy people, that actually government by experts is not government by experts, it's government by extremists.
Fanatics.
And what we have,
fanatics.
And what we have on these green committees is people who are absolutely off their rockers, voting themselves billions of pounds extra to destroy our economy.
And they're also single issue. We saw this again. You're absolutely right to raise the whole business of COVID, which has turned out to be absolute model of how a Starmer thinks the country should be run.
Yeah.
You concede everything to experts and everything to single issue. But, you know, all of us, that is actually how we are governed. You've got a single issue committee setting interest rates. You've got a single issue committee called English Nature, which worries about newts. You've got a climate change committee. Everywhere you look, you've got a single issue committee of experts.
I've got to ask you a question. I've looked up this Tony Juniper, right?
Mad.
Why do you hate him so much? Because you mention him
who is
in
he?
every single show.
He's the head of
he's
English
a person.
Nature.
Oh,
He's
right.
the head of
Okay.
English
What he
Nature.
does, and it's really, really bad, is every time we try and alleviate the housing crisis, he finds some slow worms that mean you can't build on.
It's usually newts or bats.
It's Tony Juniper. He said, you're going to have to knock down your building. There's some bats in this.
Is he friends with Chris Packham by any
But
chance?
why are you so angry with him specifically?
No, he's because he's also got such a silly name, doesn't he? If you want somebody into green, Juniper seems about right. But he's just the intense example of all of this. But wherever you look, these people are actually running us, and they're running us into the ground. The whole reason you had a cabinet was all good government involves weighing things against each other.
Yes.
Exactly what we didn't do in COVID. When this notion, the notion of SAGE was that it's absolutely dreadful if anybody dies of COVID. Forgetting the fact people are going to die of cancer, forgetting the fact children are not going to be educated, forgetting the fact you've turned the NHS into a national COVID service. Things are always
I have to say,
them.
we're going to have to move on, but I have to say, I went into my local computer shop, and I live in quite a wealthy area, and there was a mum there with 5 laptops, some of them older than others, saying, I need these for my kids, can you repair them? I'll tell you what, there weren't many people in Wigan walking into their local computer shops with enough laptops for all of their kids to study every single day, and that is something that the government did to them. OK, but are we, and I hate this question, are we releasing real criminals in order to lock up people who've tweeted?
We are indeed, yes.
That is absolutely and unfortunately true. OK.
2,000 of them.
Unbelievable.
2,000 of them. Can we all keep an eye on crime statistics?
They're all happening on the same day, by the way. It starts on the 10th of September, so purge begins.
Just everybody watch. Just everybody watch on the 10th of September, our new D-Day.
Yeah. OK, well, David, it's got a little heavy, although I have to say what's going on in this country is a heavy topic. But OK, David, students at Newcastle University, when this was all true or false, we'd just immediately go true at that point. But students at Newcastle University have been banned from using which famous Geordie word after bosses called it sexist? Avida Zane?
Pet, love.
Pet, absolutely.
That is madness.
Do you know what I'm thinking of doing? I'm thinking of bringing back the 80s and starting to call my friends Sport. Hello, Sport. How are you?
Sport.
I still call people, women love.
Do you?
I call women love, I've never had any problem or
Yeah, but the people you hang around with don't care. Hang on a second, let me just
Can you
ask-
imagine you going up to Yvette Cooper and saying, "Oh, come on, love. Pet.
Fair point.
Hang on a second, though. Hang on a second, right. What was it like hanging around with Labour MPs?
Oh,
Like, I mean,
please. This
I used to
really-
work for one, so don't ask. It's
You
pretty
worked for
dreadful.
Labour
I
MPs?
did.
Oh!
I worked for
What
the
am I-
infamous, I won't say the name, but they
Tell me afterwards.
I'll tell you afterwards. Very greasy, never showered. and had a very, very close family.
Do you know what I got told? This is really bad.
Awful.
This is the most
uninspiring
This is the
thing I've
most
ever done.
snobby thing I ever heard. On my first day working at the House of Commons, they said the biggest piece of advice we'll give you is don't have your dinner anywhere near Labour MPs. It's disgusting to watch. And I remember, like, my second day, Prescott was the handful of chips just with his fingers. Like, oh my God, horrendous. Mind you, the worst thing ever that happened at the House of Commons was when there was a clap outbreak in the Sports and Social bar. That was a low point. It really was. So do you use the word pet?
Was that not the result of cross-party fraternisation?
It was. I've got to say.
It's before my time, I might add.
You'd have been up there. You'd have been up there.
I once threw.
Where's the nearest clinic?
I tell you that the best thing that I ever did, I reckon, was I saw John Prescott that week. I went, "Oi, John!" and give him the V's. And you know what? He did it back. John is John. But come on, right? If you said something like love to a female Labour MP, you'd be in trouble, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I've never been that stupid, I have to say. And
It's like you know how they call the Strangers Bar the Kremlin because of the number of Labour MPs that drink in there. But was there like two factions, the sort of rough and ready types like you and the sort of prim and proper ones?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a fair proportion of those prim and proper ones wouldn't drink in the Strangers Bar at all. That's the reality of it. They probably at some dinner party or having at some restaurant with their close set friends, But going back to Ed Miliband, when I was a Labour MP, myself and Ian Austin MP, Labour MPs, called for him to step down as leader before the 2015 general election. We got absolutely hammered for it by the whips. But it was a disaster, a total disaster. What does Starmer do?
Ian Austin's the one who looks like Chris Evans, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. He does.
So I remember
He's in the House of Lords, isn't he?
I remember one of my friends was dating the Labour MP called Chris Evans. And my mate went, "Is it the one that's called Chris Evans or the one that looks like Chris Evans?"
It does get confusing.
Absolutely.
But then what does Starmer do when he becomes leader of the Labour Party? Brings back his North London Labour mate, Ed Miliband, puts him centre stage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolute disaster. Not just for the Labour Party, for the country.
Yeah.
So, OK, Newcastle University, do we reckon they've banned the word pet? Yeah.
I think so.
OK, that's absolutely correct. OK, let's go on.
Did they ban the pea helmets that the young ladies being addressed as pets wear? Yes.
Who was it who said that in Newcastle he was officially classified as gay because he had a coat? Mind you, I tell you what, I used to wander around Lee and you'd see these girls with basically wearing a belt in the snow.
As I said, a helmet. It's a helmet.
That was The Woke That Was. Continues after the break. It's time for That Was The Woke That Was with Andre Walker.
The writing of this is superb. I think we may have radicalised the producer. But I will read it out as it says. Canadian dictator Justin Trudeau Canadian dictator Justin Trudeau has fined an Amish community which does not use phones or electricity £400,000 for failing to download an app. Is that true or false?
Do you know what? I don't actually know, but I suspect it's true. And I bet you he's going to be best friends with Keir Starmer. They'll get on like a house on fire.
I always say you can't criticise Justin Trudeau. He's Canada's first black Prime Minister.
Yeah, he certainly is. I mean, look, this is the bonkers world we live in, right? And Justin Trudeau's government are a prime example of the route we don't want to go down. They've just reminded me that COVID never ended. That this draconian level of oversight of government and it penetrating people who haven't even got their phones.
But Alex, here's what I don't understand. Does Trudeau, I mean, I know you don't know Justin Trudeau, but does Justin Trudeau wake up in the morning going, nailed it?
Yes.
But
you can tell he does.
That country is being destroyed by this man.
Yeah.
Every policy that he brings in makes it worse. And he seems to either not know or not care. I don't understand.
No, but it also is bizarre that he hasn't been forced out of his position. He's clearly got such control over his party that people don't want to get rid of him, despite now how unpopular he is in the polls over there. He's going to get a trashing, but they've got time on their hands to keep on ruining Canada.
The thing that worries me, and worries me about people like Jacinda Ardern as well, these lots, I forget who pointed this out, but one of my contributors points out, these lots are not very old. And so they will be going to places like the UN, the World Health Organization, and all of these international bodies.
They couldn't make them any worse.
That's a fair point.
This is the. I mean, if you actually look at the stuff that comes out of the United Nations, I mean, the worst of the attacks on our freedom of speech all arise from United Nations committees. The United Nations has gone down this route before. Again, look at the behaviour of the WHO and whatever. The international organisations are precisely where the rot started.
I have to say, David, about the World Health Organization, we hear all the time, well, these organisations are corrupt, they're not much good, but it's better than nothing. I think during COVID, the World Health Organization was actively damaging, and had it not existed, we would have been better off, because all it did was attempt to shine up President Xi of China. That was its top priority.
Absolutely. My view is we should now recognise, sorry, we're going a long way from the question, that we should recognise that the 1945 settlement was just as bad, in other words, it set up the United Nations, was every bit as bad as the League of Nations after the First World War.
Agree.
And I think in many ways it's actually more damaging because, again, the whole... And there's a simple reason for it. Right from the beginning, the United Nations was penetrated by the Soviets, and its entire operations have been perverted. In other words, the kind of leftish takeover that we're seeing happening in Britain, happened in New Zealand, is happening in Canada, begins at the United Nations. And it provides the model. All this business of calling everybody you dislike fascist, that's where it starts.
But I'll tell you what I thought, and we are going to have to move on, but I'll tell you what I thought that was really interesting. On paper, this idea of bringing all the world's governments together to have a conversation about peace or whatever sounds sensible. But of course, what's happening is there's a diminution of democracy because the majority of the members are absolutely rotten dictatorships. But anyway, talking of rotten dictatorships, so has Justin Trudeau fined an Amish village £400,000 for failing to download NAP?
I'm going to say true.
It is absolutely true. OK, David Lammy was mocked worldwide this week when he was snubbed by who on a trip to the Middle East?
The trip was to Israel. It was Benjamin Netanyahu, and he was snubbed because disgracefully we withdrew our objections. I was talking about international institutions. The summoning before the International Court of Netanyahu, we objected to. Do you know who that court is run by?
Go on.
It is run by a mad Lebanese Islamist.
Really?
And you are going to arraign a Jewish prime minister before that, and Britain will support it. And by the way, why do I hate David Lammy so much? David Lammy appeared on, this is something that Rod Liddle is wonderful on. Rod Liddle can recite David Lammy's complete performance on Celebrity Mastermind. And the peak moment was when he was asked which king succeeded Henry VIII with that awful bloviating, he's a black Boris Johnson. Look at him, he looks exactly like him, but without the braids. Oh, it was Henry VII. So, see,
Did he
that
really?
is absolutely, literally
That's
true.
hilarious.
That man is our foreign.
So hang on a second.
He sits in the desk of Palmerston.
Incredible.
That is the measure of our national.
So hang on a second. Let's just be clear. Right, of all the reasons for you to hate David Lammy, there is nothing more authentically David Starkey than not knowing who Henry VIII's son is. And Henry VII is a particularly egregious example. But anyway, look, David Lammy's a joke.
That was my answer. That was my correct answer. I must have won the competition,
There you
surely.
go.
I mean, David Lammy, I accept the point that he's making. I mean, when David Lammy described himself as the British Barack Obama, I thought, let's just keep calling him that because that is superb. The guy is a numbskull, isn't he?
He's a legend in his own lunchtime.
Yes.
David.
Which presumably is a very long one. Very long liquid and expansive.
It appears to be, yeah, absolutely.
But he,
Judging by the waistline, yes.
But he will be all the worst excesses, won't he? He'll be short-termist, he'll be idiotic, and he'll play to the gallery.
And I don't think he'll last very long, actually. There was talk before the general election of David Miliband being brought back into the Lords and then to replace to be the Foreign Secretary. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that happen in the next 12 months, 18
But
months.
think of the
particularly
damage
if
he'll
you-
do meantime.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, quite. But also, if Trump does become president, look at the things he said about Donald Trump. He's called him every name under the sun, including a neo-Nazi.
I will tell you the most depressing thing about the Donald Trump situation is this man was the most pro-British American president ever, defeated Reagan by a mile in that regard. He begged the British to have the best free trade deal of any country with the United States of America in the world, and we said no because of that ridiculous thing about chlorine chicken. Absolutely shameful. But anyway, is David Lammy crap? Yes or no? Yeah. Okay. But who was
I think that's much too moderate a word.
Who was he snubbed by?
By Benjamin Netanyahu.
Absolutely correct. Okay, that comes to the end of the quiz. We've got to thank Simon Danczuk. Alex Armstrong got it right this time. And we've got to make the winner. And what you will be rewarded by is a bottle of champagne, which we have on ice.
Which I've got a bloody share.
Yeah. No, actually.
Mean.
Communism.
So
it's communism, isn't it?
So mean.
That's not true. I bought 2. But okay, you
Still got to share them.
You win the bottle of champagne that you were going to get anyway for being brought here on the wrong day last week. I apologise for that. Until next time, goodbye.